I don't believe in having kids because I don't believe in forcing somebody to live 80 years on this planet without their consent. Like, I've experienced enough suffering in my life that I'm like, yeah, there's no way I would force anybody to do this. And at the end of the day, every single reason for having a kid is selfish. I want to have a mini-me. I want my legacy to live on. I want someone to take care of me when I'm old. I want to maybe raise a child well enough that he could reduce the suffering of the people on the planet who are here who are suffering because they were forced into suffering. Like, every single reason for having a child is selfish.
This is Russ Creations, better known for various bean-related pranks.
These are black beans. This is what you get at a Mexican restaurant.
And that's not good for the computer?
No.
But recently he uploaded this video explaining why he believes it's unethical to have kids, which, as you can see, stirred up a lot of controversy. Which got me thinking, is it okay to bring kids into such a world? How do we even begin to answer this? Well, in researching that question, I fell down a rabbit hole so deep and dark that it made me question my very sanity. And I'm going to take you with me. Let's go. First of all, we have to understand that positions on natalism, which is the promotion of human reproduction, aren't a binary, but a spectrum that can be broken down into several categories. On this side, we have antinatalism, on the other, we have pronatalism, and in the middle, we have what can be called neutralism, the idea that reproduction is morally neutral. And conditionalism, the idea that each situation should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, based on the conditions. You can also use the term pro-choice, but I think that implies that pro- and antinatalists are anti-choice, which most of them aren't. They would just encourage their preferred behavior. So the pro-choice label can be applied to the whole spectrum, or at least most of it, but we'll get to that later. These categories can be further broken down into more subcategories, such as those on the extreme pronatalist side who believe we should be producing as many of these as possible.
We're going to have more than 7 if we can, basically, until my uterus is forcibly removed in a botched surgery. I'm going to keep going.
Then on the other end of the spectrum, we have things like the voluntary human extinction movement, who believe we should quit making these altogether so that humans can go extinct. Honestly, all sides seem to have some pretty good points, so I decided to put them in a tier list ranked least to most convincing. First of all, we have the natural goal argument. Some people believe that since every species seems to have one goal, survive long enough to reproduce and take care of your offspring long enough so they will hopefully reproduce too, then that is our rightful goal as a species, and any deviation from that is wrong. The problem with this argument is it falls victim to something called the appeal to nature fallacy, when someone claims that just because something is natural, it's automatically good. The truth is, whether something is natural or not has no effect on how good it is. Otherwise, we should just throw away our toilet paper and just let it crust. Another popular reason people give for why they want kids is that they want to continue their legacy. Now, as Mr. Creations was getting at earlier, this is quite a selfish reason. You're bringing a whole person into existence just because you think you're important enough to need someone to continue your legacy. This also plays into the narrative of billions of years of your bloodline ending with you because you couldn't be bothered to have kids. The truth is, you're just a tiny twig on your giant family tree. Even if your siblings don't have kids, or your cousins, or even second cousins, the odds of your, say, 5 times great-grandparents not having any offspring surviving after you die is extremely low. Another reason people may give is obligation to your country. Some may see it as your responsibility to provide your country with the next generation of citizens who can pay taxes and defend it if necessary.
When I will grow up, I will be army and save Pakistan and destroy India. Strong army, wow, great!
I have to disagree. I think the role of the state should be to serve the people, not the other way around. So I'm going to put this in F tier, along with religious obligation. Indeed, many religions promote natalism, including Christianity, which says to be fruitful and multiply. If that's something you believe in, that's fine. I'm not going to try to convert you in this video, but this is my ranking, so I'm putting it in F. Next up, we have racism. for a reason some people should reproduce and other people shouldn't. Yes, there are those who believe that some races should be reproducing more than others, especially when you look at global fertility rates. As you can see, Africans are currently making a lot more babies than Europeans are, and some see this as a threat to their pure race. Some even think it's an international effort by Jews to replace white people. Maybe I'll make a video about this topic later, but for now I'm going to put this in F. Which brings us to the C tier. Now this is an interesting one. It's something I call the hell risk.
Another reason is if you're a Christian and you believe in, heaven and hell, then why on earth would you ever have a child if it's a possibility that they could be sent to eternal damnation? That's insane.
While I might not be religious, the truth is we really can't disprove the existence of hell. And if it is real, well, the harsh truth is that most of us are going to it. According to the Christian Bible, you can be sent there simply for not being a believer at the time of your death, which currently is around 70% of the human population. And that's not even to mention the billions of people who died before Christianity was even a thing. As this author puts it, there's a highway to hell, but only a stairway to heaven. People also don't appreciate the sheer weight of hell. I mean, it's described as constant fire and eternal agonizing pain. That means trillions of years down the line, after the sun has exploded and the earth has been forgotten about, there is still going to be people in hell experiencing eternal agonizing suffering with no hope of it ending. I don't know about you, but if I thought there was even a 1% chance of hell being real, I would do everything in my power to prevent people from being born. I mean, if you think about it, all the pain and suffering experienced by humans or any species on the planet is dwarfed by a single person going to hell, because it is infinite. Now you might say, oh, don't worry, I'll do everything in my power to make sure my kids go to heaven. But you can't guarantee that. I mean, there are people who, of no fault of their own, are just going about their day, minding their business, when they experience a traumatic brain injury. About 60% of the people who experience that see a change in their personality, with the most common changes being increased aggression, decreased empathy, and increased impulsivity, all of which increase someone's chances of going to hell. Really, if we're taking this to the next logical conclusion, if hell is real, we would be obligated to sterilize as many people as we possibly can to protect future generations from eternal suffering. But that's the problem, the right religion. We could spend our whole lives evangelizing for Christianity, only to die and find out that Islam was the right religion all along. Not only would we have wasted our short time on earth, but we'd be responsible for sending all the people we converted to eternal damnation. Another criticism I have of this argument is that, sure, we can't prove that it's not real, but we also have no reason to believe it is real. For all we know, there is no afterlife, but there is a before life. Maybe there's a pool of souls floating around in before life hell. And every time someone is born, a soul is chosen at random to be saved and brought here to earth. Then we'd all be obligated to reproduce as much as physically possible. Well, in my opinion, none of these hypotheticals have much of a reason to be believed, so I don't find it very convincing. The only reason I'm not putting it in F is because technically I don't have any proof that hell isn't real. But here's one that is a bit more convincing, and one that many people still believe in. Overpopulation. You see, in the year 1 AD, the world population was around 200 million. Fast forward 800 years, and that had ballooned to still more or less 200 million. It took another 700 years to double to 400 million, then another 250 years to double again, before reaching 1 billion around the year 1800. It then took just 120 years to double again, and only 47 to double yet again, when we reached 4 billion people in 1974. It was in this context that someone named Paul Ehrlich released a book called The Population Bomb in 1968. In it, he argued that the supply of food, medicine, housing, pretty much everything we need to stay alive, wouldn't be able to keep up with the rapidly growing population, which would cause worldwide famines, chaos, and societal collapse. He predicted that hundreds of millions of people would starve in the 70s and 80s, and it's easy to see why. The population had just doubled in 47 years after doubling in 120 years. If that rate of exponential growth continued, we'd hit 8 billion in 1991, 16 billion in 1998, and 32 billion in the year 2000. But, as many of you will know, that didn't happen. We hit 6 billion in 1999, 7 billion in 2011, 8 billion in 2022, and we're expected to hit a peak of about 10 billion around the 2080s before beginning a gradual decline, although some experts believe this could happen as early as the 2050s. This is because of declining birth rates. You see, in agrarian societies, having a kid is generally seen as an asset. They're an extra hand on the farm, they can get started pretty early, and they can take care of you when you're older. Pair that with the high infant mortality rates of pre-industrial societies, and you can see why many families would have 5, 6, or 7 kids. However, in an industrialized, developed economy, having a kid is quite a financial burden. You have to take time off work, clothe them, feed them, transport them around, give them school supplies. Worst of all, they won't even start working until their late teens or early 20s, or 32 if you're on your 14th gap year like myself. Women's education is also a significant factor in fertility rates. As they focus on studying, they delay having a family more and more. It's also a higher opportunity cost if you have to take time off a high-paying white-collar job, as opposed to just taking time off of farm work, which will be made up for with the kids' future labor anyway. Just to clear up confusion, the fertility rate isn't just the rate that people are fertile. It refers to the average number of live births a woman will have in a given area. It would just be called the birth rate, but that already refers to the number of live births per 1,000 people, usually every year. Anyway, about that societal collapse stuff. As you may be able to tell, none of that happened. There have been famines, sure, but those have been largely intentional, caused by countries like the US, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. The truth is, we have more than enough food, housing, and clothing to take care of everyone on Earth. The problem, rather, is one of distribution. It's for this reason that I think overpopulation is more of a distraction from the real causes of problems. If we became less car-dependent, reduced consumption of meat, especially beef and lamb, decreased the production of unnecessary goods, and most importantly, stopped bombing other countries, we could significantly reduce the amount of resources we use, all while maintaining a steadily growing population. With that being said, I'm going to put this argument in C tier. I would put it a bit lower, but to be fair, technically having fewer children would reduce the amount of resources we use. It's just not really a sensible solution. But this brings us to something interesting, the other side of the coin, population collapse. You see, as I mentioned earlier, the fertility rate has been decreasing. From about 5.3 live births per woman in 1963 to just 2.2 in 2026. For reference, the replacement rate, enough to maintain the same population, is about 2.1. 2 to replace both parents, and about 0.1 to replace the babies who sadly don't make it to adulthood. Now, while the global fertility rate is 2.2, this number varies significantly from country to country. In the highest, Chad, it's about 5.9. In the US, UK, and Australia, it's about 1.6. While in South Korea, it's about 0.75. Not 0.75 per person, but 0.75 per woman, or about 0.38 per person. That means 100 South Koreans will have just 36 kids, 13 grandkids, and just 5 great-grandchildren. At this rate, it's easy to see why people are worried about the nation disappearing completely. Now, you may think, what's wrong with that? If South Korea's population drops from 50 million to, let's say, 10 million, we could convert vast swaths of farmland back into wilderness. Traffic would be a thing of the past, and every South Korean could have their own holiday home, even a holiday home for their dog. But not so fast. You see, when population decline from a decreasing birth rate happens, the age demographics of that country changes significantly. This is a population pyramid. It shows what percent of the populace is represented by each age group, also separated by sex. We can divide the pyramid into 3 categories: too young to work, working age, and too old to work. Those in the working age category use their labor to make society function. They make buses go, they put food on the shelves, although some of them, like myself, do vital unpaid work, such as Reddit moderation. Those outside this age bracket are dependent on our labor. Children are seen as an investment since they take up resources, but they'll eventually join the workforce. Retirees, on the other hand, have done their service and now rely on our labor until they die. The number of dependents compared to the working age population is called the dependency ratio. Worldwide, this number sits at about 58%, meaning there are around 58 dependents for every 100 working age people. The lowest score goes to Qatar with a ratio of about 17%, because they import millions of South Asians to do hard labor for them. On the other hand is South Korea, whose dependency ratio is predicted to soar over 100% by 2100, meaning minors and the retired population will outnumber the working age population. This will put a big strain on working-age South Koreans who'll have to make up for this difference. There's even been proposals from within the South Korean government to raise the work week from an already high 52 hours to 69 hours per week. That would mean 11.5 hours a day, 6 days a week, or 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. Not to be bleak, but what even is the point of life at that point? All your time would be spent either working, doing chores, or getting a small rest to keep you barely alive so you can keep working even more. And you know what people can't do in those conditions? Raise children, which just exacerbates the problem even further. And this isn't just a Korean problem. The EU's fertility rate is about 1.3, which doesn't sound as bad in comparison, but it still means 100 people will have just 62 kids, 38 grandkids, and 24 great-grandchildren. This will be a population decline that will completely dwarf that of the bubonic plague, which only killed about 1/3 of Europe. All of this sounds quite worrying. People like Elon Musk, a staunch pronatalist, has been ringing the alarm bells of population decline for a while now. He has even fathered 14 children, one of which he likes to LARP as on Twitter, but that's a different story. There's also Simone and Malcolm Collins, who run a podcast called Based Camp, where they discuss their pronatalist views.
As soon as societies basically reach a level of modernity where there is prosperity, gender equality, high levels of education, populations start to drop below replacement rate. That's a pretty serious problem if it seems like modernity and all the things that we consider to be good, like women's rights, like prosperity, like good quality of life, seem incompatible with flourishing humans.
It seems wild to me that we live in a world today where not a single country or culture, except for maybe Israel, has found out how to maintain a stable population alongside prosperity, gender equality, and education. This, as like a civilization, is probably something we should start talking about.
As of recording, they have 5 kids, with a 6th on the way. Some of their names include Torsten Savage, Titan Invictus, and Industry Americus. All of these people seem to be quite concerned by the prospect of population collapse. But here's why I'm not as worried. For one, retirees are just a subset of the total dependent population. Remember South Korea's projected ratio of 100% by 2100? Well, it's currently just 42%, compared to the worldwide average of about 58%. Turns out, most of the countries that struggle with their dependency ratios actually have too many children. It's expected that when contraceptives and women's education becomes more available in Africa, they'll experience a similar drop in fertility and actually experience somewhat of an economic boom when a large chunk of their population is of working age. Although this is just a theory. Also, remember my vital unpaid labor as a Reddit moderator? Well, many retirees do similar things. Maybe not as important, but they look after their grandkids or they volunteer in their community. It's just not counted as real labor because it's not paid. Many people also assume that panic over declining birth rates is a new thing, but it's far from it. Examples go back to the Roman Empire under Augustus, who introduced pro-natalist policies in 18 BC, which penalized celibacy and rewarded families with multiple children, especially elites. We also have examples going back to the early 1900s. Fascist leader Benito Mussolini launched the Battle for Births program in 1927 to try to raise Italy's population. While panic over overpopulation and panic over depopulation seem like opposites, they actually share a lot in common. They take complicated issues that should be fixed with policy change and blame them on people. For this reason, I'm going to put population collapse in C tier. Now, some may fuse the ideas of overpopulation and depopulation and say reproducing is obligatory in countries with low birth rates, immoral in those with high birth rates, and neutral in ones that are around replacement level. This sounds pretty reasonable to me. It can get into racist territory since right now it's Africa with a high birth rate and Europe with a low one, but you can come at it from a non-racist angle. After all, Europe used to have a booming population while Africa's was stagnating. And one day, Africa's population is going to stagnate again. Although, to be honest, whether or not someone has a kid isn't really going to make that much of an impact. So I'm going to put this in low C tier. Here's a controversial one. Selective breeding. As you may know, over the centuries, we've selectively bred certain crops and livestock to be more suitable to us. So some have asked, why not do the same with humans? Maybe only those with the highest IQs and physical abilities should be able to reproduce, while those lacking in those categories should be discouraged or even banned from reproducing. This idea is called eugenics, and it has been implemented many times in history. In the US, many states forcibly sterilized those labeled mentally ill, feeble-minded, disabled, poor, criminal, or otherwise unfit for reproduction. Sweden had a forced sterilization program going into the 1970s, which targeted disabled people, ethnic minorities, women labeled promiscuous, and the poor. It's easy to see the major ethical concerns with this. Eugenics has a violent and racist past. Not just that, but it's quite factually wrong. Most of these traits come from socioeconomic factors and have little to nothing to do with DNA. If instead we take care of these people and give them education and opportunities, we see much better results. With that being said, I do think that if someone knows that if they have a kid, they'll be born with a severe disability or chronic pain, it would be wrong to have that kid. So I'm not going to quite put it in F, this is going in C. Which brings us to a unique argument. In 1994, someone named Nancy Folbre released a book called Children as Public Goods. In it, she argued that because raising a child takes so much money and years of unpaid labor, and kids grow up to pay taxes and contribute to society in ways that retirees rely on, people who go child-free are actually freeloading off of those who choose to have kids. Now, this argument does have some merit. Those who choose to go child-free get to enjoy a lot of spare time and disposable income, all while enjoying the benefits of a society that maintains roads, stocks shelves, and will take care of them when they're older. There are some criticisms of this though. I mean, not having a kid would alleviate certain stresses on the school system. It would decrease traffic and demand for housing. That's not to mention that just because someone doesn't have a kid, that doesn't mean they can't contribute in other ways. Maybe they'll spend their time volunteering for their community, or taking care of their relatives, or donating their disposable income to charity. I'm gonna put this argument in low B.
Basically, I want everyone in India and also the world to realize one thing, that they are born without their consent. I want them to understand that they do not owe their parents anything, and I also want to know that if we are born without our consent, then we should be maintained for the rest of our life. We should be paid to live. Why not?
This is 27-year-old Indian man Raphael Samuel, who in 2019 sued his parents for giving birth to him without his consent.
Basically, none of us have consented to be here. We just came here, and we came by our parents' discretion. They got a certain joy by having us. They got a certain happiness by having us. Or at times we were a mistake. Either ways, we were not asked. and it is not also, it's not even possible to ask.
Now, at first this sounds insane, but it kind of makes sense. Think of all the times you've been wronged, all the times you've experienced pain and suffering. You may blame whoever or whatever caused it in that moment, but the truth is, it was all ultimately caused by your parents deciding to bring you into existence without your consent. Because as Raphael said, you can't consent. Or can you?
That's why I sued them, because I did not consent to being here. Like, I was unaware that I was gonna have to grow up and get a job to support myself, and I just didn't consent to that. They didn't try to contact me in any way before I was born to see if I actually wanted to be here, and that's why I sued them. Now, it's different. Like, I know I've said it's like unethical to have children before, but it's different when you adopt, because it's not my fault that they're here. I'm just trying to be a good person and like help them out. You know what I mean? So yeah, if you are pregnant right now, you need to hire a psychic medium and ask your child if they actually want to be here. But keep in mind, if they don't, you need to terminate. Otherwise, they will sue you. I'm making that my life mission, to teach children to sue their parents so they don't have to work.
Okay, that video is satire, she's a comedian, but she does bring up a good point. Adoption. Many people have thought, can it really be ethical to bring even more life into this world when there are already so many orphans awaiting adoption? According to the UN, there are around 140 million orphans worldwide, although that includes those with only one parent. There are only about 5 to 8 million orphans living in things like orphanages or short-term care. Although many of those are not technically orphans, but have been separated from their family due to things like poverty, war, disability, or abuse. Even including these, only a fraction, about 1 to 2 million, are even legally eligible for adoption. It's also worth noting the price of adoption, often reaching into the tens of thousands of dollars. We should also consider the geographic distribution of these orphans, with most of them living in Africa and Asia. And if adopted by a Westerner who might be watching, would have to learn a whole new language and way of life in their new home. Orphans often face bullying and a feeling of not fitting in. To get personal for a second, I myself grew up as a Redditor, surrounded by TikTok normies. It was hard being the only one in a room with an IQ high enough to understand Rick and Morty. So I understand the struggle. For these reasons, I'm going to put adoption in B, which brings us to one of the most common reasons given for not having kids. Worry about the future. Many people see predictions about climate change, regional instability, and the rise of fascism, and wonder if it's even okay to bring life into such a turbulent world. And this isn't a new fear. During the Cold War, many people were apprehensive about having kids because what if nuclear war breaks out? Then you'd have to try to survive that all while taking care of some baby. This also goes back to the Roman Empire, where we had writers complaining that elites were avoiding marriage and starting families due to worry about the future during the fall of Rome. This happened during the Black Death, the Great Depression, and the World Wars. But I can't help but think, out of all these periods, we have by far the highest standard of living. Even in the unlikely scenario that the quality of life halves for the next generation, they'd still be living like kings compared to 99% of people throughout history. But this is me talking about the developed world. Put yourself in the shoes of the average Sudanese person, for example. In 1888, due to a war with Egypt and Britain, a famine broke out, killing 1.5 million people. In 1926, another famine. In 1973, drought brought another famine. In 1983, a civil war broke out, killing 1 to 2 million people, mostly civilians. Now, since 2023, a civil war has left hundreds of thousands of people dead and 4 million children malnourished. I don't know about you, but if I was Sudanese, I would be quite apprehensive about bringing life into such a world. It's clear to see this concern can vary a lot depending on where and when you are, so I'm going to put this in B. A popular reason people give for having kids is they want someone to take care of them when they're older. And this is increasingly necessary in the coming decades, where we might see a shortage of aged care workers. Having a kid who grows up into an adult is a pretty good way of assuring you have at least someone who's obligated to take care of you. But critics point out this is quite a selfish reason. I mean, you want to bring an entire person into existence just to be your personal carer. This puts extra strain on those who don't have siblings. In China, where the one-child policy was only lifted in 2016, many people have to juggle caring for 2 senior citizens on top of working 44 to 48 hours a week, leaving almost no time for things they actually enjoy. On the other hand, I do see how it would be hard to be a retiree in a place with an overwhelmed aged care system, so I'm going to put this in the B tier too. Which brings us to an interesting one. Effect on nature. Humans are responsible for destroying about 1/3 of the world's forests, an area around the size of the US. We've brought over 1,000 species to extinction since the year 1500, and that number is growing. Every year, the average human wastes around 100 kilos of plastic and emits around 5 metric tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. As much as we should be blaming the capitalist system for this is the system we live in, and will be for the foreseeable future. We can criticize the system all we like, but for the time being, every human is contributing to the destruction of Earth. Even if someone walks or takes public transport as much as possible, recycles, goes vegan, and buys all their clothes secondhand, they're still going to be producing waste. Much of recycling goes straight to landfill, and even vegan crops require forests to be cleared. They need to be transported in trucks and ships, which take up fuel. The only way to have a net neutral impact on the environment is to spend a lot of time volunteering for ecological charities or donating a lot of money to them, which I know I'm not doing. It is worth noting, however, the geographic disparity in pollution. Every year, the average American wastes as much plastic as 10 Chadians, and emits as much CO2 as 100 Chadians. All of a sudden, that "it depends on the country" argument gets flipped on its head. Maybe it's less ethical to have kids in developed countries as it is in undeveloped countries. Although they might have a worse life, so that complicates things too. Plus, eventually they are going to industrialize, and so then if you have more people, there's going to be more people in the future as well, which will make even more pollution. And to be fair, the term carbon footprint was invented by British Petroleum to get people to blame individuals for this problem instead of big companies. You know what, let's just put this in B and move on to the next argument. This is David Benatar, probably the most prominent name in the anti-natalist movement. In 2006, he released a book called Better Never to Have Been, The Harm of Coming into Existence, which makes a very interesting point. His point is, pain is bad and pleasure is good. Pretty reasonable. But he goes on to say, the absence of pain is good, even if no one exists to enjoy that good, while the absence of pleasure is not bad unless someone exists to be deprived of that pleasure. It can be more easily understood with this table. If someone exists and they feel pain, that is bad. If someone exists and they feel pleasure, that is good. If someone doesn't exist, but they would feel pain if they did exist, then it's good that they don't exist. However, if someone doesn't exist, but they would feel pleasure if they did exist, then that's not a bad thing. It's morally neutral. Think of it like this. Is it bad that there aren't happy people on Mars right now? Well, no, nothing bad is coming from them not existing. It's morally neutral. But is it a good thing that there aren't people on Mars right now experiencing pain? Well, yes. If that were the case, the universe would be a worse place because there would be more suffering. He concludes then that we should stop reproducing altogether because that's the only way to eliminate human suffering. He calls this the asymmetry of pleasure and pain, or just the asymmetry argument. He also makes the point that most people massively underestimate how bad their lives really are. I mean, how often are you truly happy? Not too hot, not too cold, not itchy or uncomfortable. And that's not even to mention all the distress and grief you're going to experience in your life. While most old people report being glad that they lived their life, he says this is because of nostalgia blinding their vision. If you actually used a time machine to go back to a random point in their lives, they were probably working a job they don't like, doing chores, being in an argument, fighting in a war. The odds that you go back to a time when they were experiencing actual joy is really quite low. Now, for someone who believes in this whole asymmetry argument thing, I can't help but wonder, Wouldn't it be our obligation to kill as many people as possible? Sure, by ending someone's life, you'd be causing them pain in the moment, and their family would be sad to see them go. But that's a blink of the eye compared to the millions of future generations that you'd be saving from suffering. Sure, they won't consent to having their life ended, but those millions of future generations never consented to their lives being created. In researching for this video, I came across an argument that was so bizarre and goes against our most fundamental, basic human thoughts about morality. But it kind of makes sense. It states that, okay, we want to minimize pain, which is more important than maximizing pleasure, and we should extend that to animals too, because they have feelings just like us. But most animals are selected, meaning they create as many offspring as possible in the hopes that a few will make it to adulthood, as opposed to K-selected animals, which will only make a few offspring, but will take care of them until adulthood. Now, we don't appreciate just how gruesome the average life of an R-selected animal really is. They're born alongside hundreds or maybe thousands of their siblings. Depending on the species, they'll either be immediately rejected by their mother, or maybe she'll abandon them before they're even hatched. Then they'll experience a lifetime of pure fear before experiencing an agonizing death mere days or maybe just hours after being born. So, if we want to minimize suffering in all species, maybe the most ethical thing to do is to sterilize as many R-selected animals as we possibly can. Or how about this? This article estimates that the average human birth in the US will prevent around 11 billion insect births. Maybe just by being alive, humans are acting out the ultimate form of self-sacrifice. We live a life of suffering that we never consented to being brought into, which saves billions of other animals from the same fate. Even better if you eat meat or live in low-density housing with large, well-manicured lawns. I mean, that's billions of bugs, birds, little creepy crawlies and critters who are being saved from pain. Come to think of it, if the most ethical thing to do is to prevent life from coming into existence, then maybe we're obligated to destroy as much life as possible. Maybe when supervillains in movies want to destroy Earth, they're actually the good guys. They'd be saving trillions of animals from a life of suffering that they never consented to being brought into if it weren't for some heroes arrogantly assuming that Earth is worth saving. This idea that preventing suffering is more important than causing pleasure is called negative utilitarianism. For those of you who, for some godforsaken reason, didn't watch my last video about ethics, utilitarianism is the belief that doing something bad can be justified if it's necessary for the greater good. For example, if you have to divert a train to only hit one person instead of 5 people. Negative utilitarianism is a specific variant of utilitarianism, which, like I said, prioritizes minimizing pain over maximizing pleasure, as opposed to positive utilitarianism, which is the opposite. I have to say that, unless I'm missing something, if we accept the premises of negative utilitarianism, then we should destroy planet Earth. We should save up as many nukes as we possibly can and just deploy them, evenly spread across the globe, to end as much life as possible. There would still be some microscopic life that would survive, but eventually there'd probably be a big enough asteroid to hit Earth, and there wouldn't be any humans there to deflect it. Unless those microorganisms that survive have enough time to evolve into a technically advanced species that can deflect an asteroid, in which case we'd actually be responsible for causing a whole new period for suffering on Earth. Maybe we have a responsibility to survive as a species long enough so that eventually, when a giant asteroid is heading for Earth, we can sit by and let it happen, finally ending all suffering in the known universe. The idea that all life should cease to exist is called ephilism, which they get from creatively spelling the word life backwards and adding ism at the end. See what I mean when I said researching this video made me question my sanity and even the point of life? These are the kinds of conclusions you can come to when thinking about ethics in terms of strict logic and statistics, instead of feelings and intuition like saving a life is good. You know, maybe at a certain point we should just say, screw philosophy. Humans have an innate desire to stay alive, and while we're here, maybe we should take decent care of the planet. I mean, people like being out in nature and not having natural disasters become more frequent and more severe. Sorry to the trillions of case-selected animals out there, but maybe you need to live a little life of suffering to keep this ecosystem running. And you know, maybe people can get quite a sense of meaning and joy and purpose from increasing the joy among people and animals who already exist. But hey, maybe that's actually what we should be focusing on. Meaning. This is Jordan Peterson, a former psychologist and prominent self-help author from Canada, who you've probably seen on the internet once or twice.
The question, did that happen, begs the question, what do you mean by happen? Because when you are dealing with fundamental realities and you pose a question, you have to understand that the reality of the concepts of your question, when you're digging that deep, are just as questionable as what your question.
I like that joke. That's good. It's semantic game playing of the best sort.
As a staunch pronatalist, he would take great issue with David Benatar's ways of thinking. In fact, he would disagree with the very premise that we should be trying to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. He sees this as a nihilistic, hedonistic way of looking at life that leaves people feeling empty. Instead, our goal in life should be to take on as much responsibility as we can and become the most virtuous version of ourselves. And parenthood, according to Peterson, is how we should do that.
The idea that life is, that happiness is the purpose of life. It's like great for happiness, man. If it comes along, you should be thrilled that it's visiting you. But the notion that that's what you should pursue, that's the weakest possible notion. First of all, as soon as something terrible happens to you, you're done. It's like life is to be happy. It's like, well, now you have cancer. So how's that? How's the happiness thing working out for you now? You need a meaning to sustain you in the face of suffering, or you become bitter and nihilistic and malevolent and hopeless. The meaning that will sustain you through suffering is to be found in the adoption of responsibility.
Now, I actually see this as quite reasonable. People who chase pleasure and avoid responsibility do tend to struggle with feelings of meaninglessness. I mean, you can spend all day playing video games and gooning to sonic inflation, and you might feel a little bit of dopamine, sure, but you won't feel like you have a purpose or any reason why you should exist in the first place. I do disagree with him a bit though. I would say we should take on responsibility so we can have a sense of purpose for the greater goal of being happy. But okay, let's say everyone takes on Jordan Peterson's advice and becomes a parent. Well, now that infant mortality is so low, the fertility rate just needs to be a little bit over 2.0, and eventually we will run into problems. If it were just 2.5, we'd hit 10 billion people around the 2050s or 60s, and 20 billion around the late 2100s. And hey, what about people who are gay, or infertile, or severely disabled, or simply wouldn't like to have kids? How can they get a sense of purpose? Well, lucky for them, there are many ways to do this. Like taking care of other people or animals, mastering a skill, maybe even through a career. Although it's still important to maintain close relationships with friends and family, even if you don't have kids. But hey, we're talking a lot about what it means for the parent. How is it going to make them feel? Is it going to give them a sense of purpose? What about the very people we're bringing into existence? Well, we should look into another popular reason given for not wanting kids. Some people believe they would simply be a bad parent. To be honest, I do think a lot of people use this as an excuse to be lazy and not self-improve. Common reasons given for why someone would be a bad parent is they're financially irresponsible or short-tempered or struggle with addiction. These are things that people can generally improve on, especially if they feel like they have a reason for doing so, like having to take care of a whole human. But hey, for those who are honest with themselves and just think, look, maybe I'd want to be a parent, but I really shouldn't because of XYZ reason, I wouldn't be able to give them a happy life, I respect that. So I'm putting this in A. Those of you who watched my last video that I just mentioned about ethical philosophies will know about the last one I talked about, something called effective altruism. I won't go into the details here, but the conclusion is that we should be donating as much money as possible to those who really need it, like those experiencing famine and disease in Africa who could be saved with a simple donation. You know what is seriously going to inhibit someone's ability to do that though? Having a kid. In the US, raising a child from 0 to 18 costs about $300,000. That kind of money could save about 100 lives if donated effectively. We have to ask ourselves, should someone's desire to have a kid really outweigh the importance of saving 100 lives? The only way I can justify this is firstly trying to minimize spending without jeopardizing the child's health or happiness. This could lower it to maybe around $150,000. But then, what if you raise them to be an effective altruist themselves? You only have so much time and so much money you can make as an individual, but if you have kids, that could be a kind of investment. That's a whole new person who could grow up to save so many lives. Hell, you could even have a few kids, and they could have a few of themselves. Soon enough, you'll have a whole army of effective altruists. Now, of course, there are some criticisms to this. Like, you can't guarantee that those kids are actually going to agree with you on effective altruism. In fact, if you'll cringe about it and shove it down their throats, they're probably going to want to be whatever the opposite of an effective altruist is. But I think if you do genuinely care for them and don't just treat them like a donating machine, they will probably end up being sympathetic to the cause of effective altruism. Another criticism, though, is that it would actually be a lot more effective to just try to convert people who already exist. You don't have to spend 150 grand on showing your buddy some YouTube video about effective altruism. And that's a pretty good point. But look, it's not just about effective altruism. Maybe your kid would grow up to make the world a better place simply by helping people out, volunteering, or maybe they'd be a doctor or a Reddit moderator. Either way, I'm putting the altruistic child argument in S tier. Which brings us to mutual enjoyment. Honestly, if someone would like to be a parent simply because they think they would have a happy, close bond with their kid, and they think they'd be a pretty good parent, their kid is probably going to grow up to be glad they were alive. And that's as good of an argument as I can think of. If I missed any arguments, or you have any questions or criticisms, please leave them in the comments. My next video is going to be a deep dive into the ethics of veganism. If that's already out, it'll be on screen now. If not, I'll try to have it out in a couple weeks, but we'll see. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to gently demolish that like and sub button, and I'll see you later. See ya.